I paid the price for cheating when my husband caught me with his boss and took the ultimate revenge. Before that turning point, Judith and Rick's relationship was strong, built on admiration and shared dreams. They met 15 years ago. Fresh out of Rutgers University, and quickly bonded at a friend's party. After 2 years of dating, they moved in together. And later married, they built a stable home, and had 2 sons, Will and Robert, whom they raised with love. Judith had a successful career as a designer, and Rick was a supportive husband. However, as Judith's career took off, things shifted. Her long work hours began to strain the family. Though Rick was patient, subtle cracks in their relationship started to appear. Judith reassured herself that she could juggle her career and family life, believing she had it all under control. Judith often reflected on her good fortune, feeling lucky for her full life. At 40, she still admired her appearance, a tall, fit blonde, with youthful eyes. These thoughts vanished as she packed for her upcoming trip to San Diego. She folded her clothes carefully and made sure her luggage was ready before Rick and the boys returned. The trip was a reward from Dalton Industries for a successful project launch. Judith was excited, though Rick hadn't been thrilled about her being away again. She had worked hard to convince him, and he eventually agreed, though not happily. Judith, a top designer at Casual Creations, specialized in packaging design. Her recent project was a success, and she was proud of her work, even though it meant spending long hours away from her family. As she prepared dinner that evening, she thought about the previous night with Rick. Their lovemaking had been intense, more passionate than usual. The memory made her want to make the evening special. Before leaving, dinner was ready, and everything was on schedule. As Rick and the boys arrived, Judith didn't want to dwell on the past right now. Her focus was on her family, her husband Rick, and their 2 boys, Will and Robert. Will, nearly 9, was carefree, while 7-year-old Robert was more serious. They balanced each other well, and Judith loved them equally. She and Rick had met at a party 15 years ago, instantly connecting, despite attending Rutgers. Without crossing paths, after dating for 2 years, they moved in together, and eventually married. She cherished the memory of Rick's proposal, and their life had been wonderful. When they were ready, they were blessed with 2 healthy boys. Judith had it all, though a slight chill ran through her at the thought, which she brushed off. As nerves about her trip, she greeted her boys with hugs as they came home, Rick following close behind. She embraced Rick, noticing his tension. Although he relaxed, there was a shadow in his eyes. "You don't have to go. You know, we all want you to stay," Rick said. Looking into her eyes, "It's too late now, it's just a quick business trip," she replied, attempting another hug, but he moved toward the powder room. Dinner was lively, with the boys talking about their day and upcoming school projects. Will wanted to make an erupting volcano for the science fair, while Robert preferred something unique. Their banter was good-natured, and Rick let them go on, before eventually stepping in. Judith enjoyed the moment, but soon it was time to get ready. Rick insisted they'd clean up later. Packed and ready, Judith hugged and kissed her boys before sending them off to play. She turned to Rick. "I'll miss you all. It's just 3 nights. You'll pick me up Wednesday, right?" Rick nodded, with a smile. "Don't worry, it's all set. You go enjoy yourself." Judith noticed the same darkness in his eyes, but before she could say anything, a car horn interrupted. "That's Rachel. I'd better go," she said, giving Rick a quick hug and kiss before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. She glanced back, but Rick had already gone inside, feeling uneasy. She told herself it was just her imagination. In the car, Rachel joked, 3 days at Redstone. Too bad you're so happily married. It could have been fun." Judith laughed, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too late to turn back now. At the airport, Judith checked her bags, went through security, and found her gate. Just as she sat down, Wes Southern joined her, with a grin. "Ready for San Diego? Too bad we can't skip the meetings and just stay in bed," he joked, referencing their previous encounters. Judith smiled, despite her unease, knowing they'd have plenty of time together during the trip. She and Wes had started their affair 2 months earlier. After a long day at work, exhausted, they fell asleep on her office couch, and when she woke, she mistook Wes's touch for Rick's. Guilt battled pleasure, but she gave in. What began as a one-time encounter soon became more frequent, though they kept it casual and secret. using protection to avoid complications. Over time, her guilt faded, and she resumed closeness with Rick, though something still felt off, Judith convinced herself. The affair wasn't serious, and that it didn't affect her marriage. This trip, although it gave her time alone with Wes, still felt work-related, and not like a full-blown affair. She rationalized that everything would return to normal afterward, and she would refocus on Rick. In San Diego, after checking in, Judith called home and spoke to her boys for an hour, but when she asked for Rick, they said he was upstairs, and quickly hung up. She was confused. Why had Rick been so quick to get rid of her? Could he suspect something? She brushed off the thought, assuming it was just guilt, and met Wes for dinner. After dinner, they headed to her room, eager to be together. The night was filled with passion, and they eventually fell asleep before dawn, but in the early morning, as Judith drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she felt a deep sense of loneliness and sadness. The intensity of it woke her, repeating no, no, no. Drenched in sweat, she got up and stood in the shower, trying to wash away the feeling. The 3 days flew by, with nights filled with sex between Judith and Wes. Though it had always been exciting, due to the secrecy, it soon began to feel routine. The thrill faded, and by the end of the trip, they both agreed to end the affair on good terms. Judith was eager to return home to Rick and the boys, but she hadn't been able to reach them. The last 2 nights, her calls went unanswered, with only the answering machine picking up. At the airport, she tried calling Rick's office, but there was no answer, so she left a reminder about picking her up. She boarded the plane and quickly fell asleep, despite Wes's joking comment about joining the Mile High Club. When they landed at Kennedy, Wes stayed behind, as Judith headed to baggage claim, expecting Rick to be there, but instead of Rick, she saw a man holding a sign with her name. He explained he was sent to pick her up and take her home. Assuming Rick was just busy, Judith agreed, and got into the limo. She called Rick's phone again, but only got his voicemail. Now she was starting to worry. The drive seemed endless, and all her attempts to contact Rick failed. When they finally reached her house, it looked dark and deserted. Before she could get out, the driver handed her an envelope with her name on it in Rick's handwriting. Feeling panicked, she grabbed her bag and rushed inside. The house was quiet, with only a few lights on. She searched every room, but no one was home. Upstairs in their bedroom, everything seemed normal, until she noticed Rick's closet door was open, something he never left that way. When she looked closer, she realized all of his clothes were gone. Rick had left. Feeling sick to her stomach, Judith slowly walked into her boys' room. The beds were made, but their computers, favorite posters, and clothes were all gone. Panic rising, she ran downstairs, searching for a note, then remembered the manila envelope. Grabbing it from the kitchen table, she tore it open and collapsed into a chair. Inside were photos, a report from Spaulding Investigations, and a document titled Decree for Dissolution of Marriage. Judith screamed, overwhelmed by grief. She cried uncontrollably, pleading for another chance, throwing dishes in her despair, until she finally passed out. When she woke to the morning sunlight, she numbly gathered the papers she'd thrown across the room. The first thing she saw were the photos, incriminating shots of her and Wes. She rushed to the sink, her stomach turning, then returned to the table, pushing the rest of the pictures aside. The report detailed her affair, with dates, times, and photo references, documenting her betrayal. Judith didn't have the strength to read more, and laid the report down. The legal document, thick and official, sat there, but she couldn't face reading it. Instead, she opened the envelope, with a note from Rick. The letter began, Judith, by now you know, the boys and I are gone. I took our clothes, some of the boys' important things, and my stuff from the den. We're in a small apartment, for now, until we divide our assets. Rick continued, explaining how he found out about the affair one night, after she said she'd be working late. He brought her a milkshake, only to discover her with Wes in her office. He had watched briefly, then left with the milkshake, thankful the boys had stayed in the car. That night, he told her he had a headache, a night she likely wouldn't even remember. She remembered that night vividly. It was the first time she and Wes had slept together. Overcome with guilt, she had dreaded facing Rick, but when she got home, Rick said he wasn't feeling well, and she was relieved. She didn't have to talk to him. She even said a small prayer of thanks. Rick's letter continued, explaining how he had hired a private investigator, hoping it was just a one-time mistake, but it wasn't. the investigator easily installed a camera in her office. After Rick copied her key, Rick admitted he couldn't look at many of the photos, though she seemed to be enjoying herself with Wes. When Judith mentioned the business trip Rick had already planned to move out while she was gone, he learned Wes was joining her, though she had lied about who would be there. Rick expressed his anger, feeling betrayed, not just by the affair, but by the deliberate deception. He could have forgiven a single mistake, but not a planned betrayal. Rick assured her his lawyer would contact her soon, and he hoped they could settle custody and visitation peacefully. Though he no longer loved her, he wanted the boys to stay in their home. He ended the letter by saying they had nothing more to discuss and that he was done with her. Judith now understood the fear and dread she had been feeling. It was her conscience trying to warn her, but it was too late. Rick was gone, and she had lost everything. Years passed, and Judith and Rick led separate lives, both achieving success in their careers. Judith owned her own company, having built it through hard work, sitting in her office. She shuffled papers on her desk, trying to make a decision. She reminded herself she didn't need to please anyone but her client, yet she was struggling. She thought about how Rick had always been a great sounding board for her ideas. She picked up her 3 best concepts and murmured, "Let's see what he'd think of these." She started with the weakest one, imagining Rick's feedback, knowing it needed improvement. Then she moved on to the next. Still nothing. Damn, he was tough. That's why I always turned to him for advice. Okay, here's the last one. 2 people are holding hands, walking down the street, unaware of a speeding car heading toward them. The man says, "I got the papers from our Continental insurance agent today. We're covered for anything." In the background, the car swerves and hits a light pole instead. They walk away, oblivious to the danger. "Yeah, that's the best one. The client will like it. I'll have Clark start on it tomorrow." "Tonight. I'm too tired." I stood up, turned off the light, and saw Will in the doorway. He smiled sadly, talking to Dad again. "Yeah, it helps," I said, and it did. Talking to Rick always made things clearer. "What are you doing up? You have school tomorrow." "Just getting water. I'm not missing the final game tomorrow." "Neither am I. We'll be behind the bench, cheering you on." He smiled and walked off to bed. Tomorrow was the final basketball game, and if Will's team won, they'd go to the state quarterfinals. It was a long shot, but Will, a starting guard and senior, was hopeful. He was his father's son. I followed him to the kitchen, watching him finish his water. Before waving goodnight, I sat down, not ready for bed. Will was smart, not as brilliant as Robert, but still sharp. He had heard me talking to Rick again, and while he accepted it, Robert hated it. Rick and I divorced after 15 years of marriage, and today marked 8 years since it became official. It was my fault, and I had told the boys when they were old enough. Will took it hard, but eventually forgave me. Robert took longer. After the divorce, Rick never tried to take the boys away from me. He wanted unlimited visitation, and I agreed, because having my boys was all I had left. When I went through dark times, Rick took the boys. Until I was stable, they supported me, likely with Rick's help, and were the reason I kept going. As they grew older, they spent more time at home, and less with Rick, who was busy with work. I let them have their freedom, and they became strong, confident young men. Rick and I rarely spoke, except about the boys. Financially, we were both stable, so there were no issues with alimony or child support. Over the years, we found a way to cooperate and support each other when needed. It was a peaceful, comfortable arrangement. After several hard years, I don't think Rick ever forgave me, but at least he no longer seemed to hate me. That was a relief. I still talk to him, in my mind, because I never stopped loving him or relying on his advice. Even though he wasn't there, I could imagine our conversations clearly, and it always helped. It kept me sane, especially during the dark times. After our divorce, when I almost drowned in depression, Rick was cold for the first 2 years. After the divorce, he wouldn't speak to me or let me explain, though I wasn't even sure why I did what I did. His lawyer handled everything, and when I resisted, Rick threatened to change the divorce terms and take the boys. I gave in and signed what he wanted. After the divorce, I spiraled. I threw myself into my job, the only thing I had, besides my boys. Though Wes was still around, we had no contact by mutual agreement, but he bragged about our affair, which hurt my reputation at work. People saw me differently, and I became isolated. One night, a colleague asked me out. I initially refused, but then accepted. Thinking it might help me move on, I drank too much, and we ended up at his place. The sex was rough and quick, leaving me feeling empty. But I convinced myself I didn't need Rick. Over the next few weeks, I went on more dates, but they all ended the same, unsatisfying, and leaving me feeling used. One night, I woke up on the floor of my living room, disheveled and alone, with only vague memories of the evening. I couldn't remember who I had been with, but I knew I had hit rock bottom. That night, I realized how far I'd fallen. Shame and disgust washed over me, and I questioned what I had become. Thankfully, my boys were with their father that weekend, sparing them from seeing me at my lowest. Eventually, I calmed down enough to clean up and make some important decisions. I found an old phone book in Rick's office and scheduled a doctor's appointment. I also resigned from my job, knowing I had to move forward. My sons kept me going, but I was alone most days while they were in school. I came close to doing something reckless, more than once, but I didn't, which was a miracle. Before I lost everything, I saw a therapist, Cheryl Hopkins, recommended by my doctor. She put me on medication and helped me slowly regain control of my life. At first, I barely held on, but over time, I fought my way back. Through therapy, I realized that even though I had everything, a successful career, 2 wonderful boys, and a loving husband, it wasn't enough for me. I didn't know why, but I went looking for something more. That's how my affair with Wes began. He was attractive and flirtatious, and I responded. The thrill of the forbidden outweighed the guilt, and we started an affair that lasted 3 months, culminating in the San Diego trip. But it cost me my marriage. I continued working, but my reputation had suffered. Wes had talked about our affair, and I became known more for that than my professional skills. Though I had the option of claiming sexual discrimination, I chose not to stir trouble. As long as they left me alone, I also made poor decisions by dating men who took advantage of my vulnerability. These meaningless encounters left me feeling empty, and I eventually realized I had hit rock bottom. That's when I called my doctor and began the long climb out of my depression. With Cheryl's relentless support, it took 2 years, but I finally recovered. Though I still check in with her occasionally, I quit my job and left that chapter behind. But I needed to work for my own sanity. Rick had left me the house and enough financial support, but I wanted to build something new, so I started my own business. J. Proctor Packaging Concepts. From home, I used some equity from the house to get a loan and bought the necessary equipment: a high-performance computer, color copier, drafting board, and tools for graphic design and packaging. With that, I began rebuilding my life. At the time, Will had just turned 13, and Robert was 11. They helped a lot, giving me time to work in the evenings while they entertained themselves. It was a good setup. We compromised. I took them to their games, and they gave me quiet time to focus on my business. They understood what I was trying to do, and we worked as a team. It was a great period in my life, as I started gaining clients. At first, I got a few referrals from former colleagues. I lost the first 2 accounts, but secured the third, and my business began to grow. As it expanded, I hired a small team to handle calls, drafts, and sales. I had a small office built behind the house, which worked perfectly. Over the next 2 years, my business grew steadily, and I became financially successful, paying off my loans. Fast forward a few more years. Will was 17, Robert Ascot. Robert was almost 16, and I had turned 48. My business was thriving, with 12 employees, and I kept it small, focusing on clients who wanted top-quality work. I was financially secure, and the boys had everything they needed. I didn't rely on Rick much anymore, and he agreed to put his support payments into a college fund for the boys. Will was likely to get a basketball scholarship to Ohio State, and Robert, being academically gifted, would easily secure one too. Both boys were popular. Will had a serious girlfriend, and Robert was starting to date as well. My business success brought social connection, and I was well known in the community, often invited to important events. But one thing was missing. I didn't date. Since crawling out of the emotional hole I had fallen into, I hadn't cared about any man. I had plenty of offers from wealthy single men, but I wasn't interested. I only cared about one man, Rick. When Rick left me, it was dramatic. He packed up and moved out. While I was on a 3-day trip with Wes, I told Rick it was for business, which was true, but I didn't mention Wes. Rick already knew though. He had everything documented. I foolishly believed I could keep the affair hidden, thinking consequences were for others. Ironically, during that trip, I realized I was done with cheating. I thought about Rick the whole time. I was with Wes. By the end of the trip, I had recommitted to my marriage. But when I returned, Rick had already left, leaving behind photos, divorce papers, and a blunt letter, saying we were finished. I deserved it. That triggered my depression, which took 2 years to overcome. Then I spent another 5 years, building my business. Despite the divorce, I still considered myself married, holding on to the promise I made to myself, on the plane ride back from San Diego. To rededicate myself to Rick, even though it was too late, my pride wouldn't let me break that promise. During those years, I met several interesting men. I fantasized about a few. Even having some erotic dreams, but my only indulgence was a blue toy I kept locked away. I used it occasionally, when my boys were out for the night, and though I started thinking of those men, I always ended up thinking of Rick. When I climaxed, strange, right? Life, however, kept moving forward. The night after I had one of those thoughts, Robert and I were at Will's basketball game. And his team pulled off a huge upset, winning and advancing to the state quarterfinals. Will was ecstatic, and Robert was just as thrilled. Proud of my boys, I agreed to let Will's team celebrate at our house. We had the space, a pool, and enough parent chaperones to keep everything under control. The night was a success, and I set about rearranging my schedule to be there for the upcoming regional game. The next day, while working on my schedule, in the kitchen, the phone rang. Without checking the caller ID, I answered. "Hello, this is Judith Proctor." Balancing the phone on my shoulder, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a while. "Rick, hi, Judith, it's me." His familiar voice sent a chill through me. "Yes, I recognized your voice. Good to hear from you. How have you been?" I replied. "Good. I was wondering about the regional game schedule. I want to see who will play, but don't know the details. I'm just planning that now." I said, "The game is next Saturday, in Columbus. Robert and I are driving down on Friday night. We've got tickets, including one for you. Could we get together for dinner, Rick?" I asked, surprising myself. "The four of us, before the game. I'd also like to sit with you and Robert during the game, dinner together. We hadn't done that in the 8 years since our divorce. We were civil for the boys, but never spent time as a family." "Sure, that would be great," I replied, still processing the unexpected invitation. "Will would love to see us together." I told him we were staying at the Madison Hotel, while the other family had rooms at the Marriott Courtyard. Rick was listed under Will's family, so booking a room would be easy. As I hung up, I couldn't help but wonder why he wanted to have dinner with us. Was it something new? Was he engaged? Or was there another reason for this sudden change? Rick mentioned he liked the idea of staying at the hotel and might book a room there. I said goodbye, still in shock from the call, and hoped I hadn't missed anything important. I pushed my emotions aside and finished my scheduling, which now felt even more significant. After all, I was going to have dinner with my ex-husband. The ex part didn't matter much to me. I didn't mention the dinner to Will or Robert until right before we left. Will had already spoken to Rick, knowing he planned to attend the game and spend time with them, but said nothing about us eating together. The night before the trip, I made sure the boys were packed, and then called them to the kitchen for apple pie, something they both loved. "Boys, I have news. The three of us are having dinner with your father the night before the game." He called and asked, and I said yes. I expected a reaction, but neither of them said a word. They just kept eating. Their casual attitude surprised me, but then I realized they saw it as normal. For such a big event, to them, it wasn't a big deal, but to me, it was huge. I hadn't shared a meal with Rick in nearly 8 years. "Well, it's a big deal to me," I said. "Mom, Dad asked us if we were okay with it, and we said yes." I felt embarrassed. "Why didn't you tell me? We know it's a big deal. Mom, Dad's looking forward to it, and it'll be great if we can all get along." After cleaning up, I packed the car. But my nerves only grew. I couldn't shake the thought that Rick had found someone new, and would use this dinner to tell us he had dated before, including a serious relationship with Leslie Wells a few years back, and I remembered how sick that conversation made me. Though their relationship ended, I feared Rick might now be ready for something more permanent. And dinner would be the moment he'd break the news. Rick's second serious relationship was about a year and a half ago, with a younger woman, Jean Chambers. She was at least 10 years younger than him. At first, I found it amusing, but then I became concerned when he used the word love to describe her. I ended the conversation quickly. He never mentioned her again. but I assumed they were still together. I made it clear to my boys that their father's relationships were off limits in conversations with me, and they respected that. I was convinced this dinner was Rick's way of telling us he was going to propose to Jean. Rick would tell us before making it official. He was always polite and considerate. He had every right to move on, especially after what I did to him. But the thought still stung. The next day, we set off for the drive to Columbus for Will's quarterfinal game. Will was with his team on the bus, and Robert and I drove separately. I wanted to arrive early enough to shower, change, and prepare for dinner. I had a new dress, shoes, and jewelry, and even wore the perfume Rick bought me years ago. I wanted him to remember what he had walked away from. After checking in at the hotel, I let Robert have his own room, explaining he'd have to share with Will later. We decided to check if the team's bus had arrived, but we had beaten it by over an hour. While Robert led the way, I browsed the hotel lobby in nearby shops. Eventually, the bus arrived, and we saw Will with his girlfriend, Jill. After greeting her, Will spotted us and came over. He and Robert went to their room to change, while I headed back to the lobby to window shop and people watch. A short while later, I saw Rick walk in. It was both a shock and a thrill to see him again. I didn't make myself known, but watched as he checked in. Efficiently, as always, he still looked great, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of memories, even when I fantasized 10 times, even in my fantasies about other men. It was Rick who always came to mind. I went back to my room to get ready and composed myself, making sure I was calm. When Rick called, after finishing my hair and makeup, I checked on the boys. They were talking about the game, full of excitement. They looked handsome, in clean shirts and pressed jeans. Okay. I pressed their jeans, but still, I returned to my room to finish getting ready. I wanted to put on my dress at the last moment to avoid wrinkles. As I fastened my necklace, the phone rang. It was Rick. "Are you ready?" he asked. 5 minutes, I replied, trying to steady my nerves. After hanging up, I started to panic. The reality of sitting down to dinner with Rick hit me hard. I called to the boys, and when they came into my room, Will whistled. "Wow, Mom, you look hot," he said, with a grin. His compliment choked me up. I smiled and kissed him on the forehead, and as he pretended to protest, he whispered, "Go for it, Mom." I was ready, with Will's encouragement. My fears faded. I decided to enjoy the evening with my handsome sons and ex-husband, ignoring the consequences. I linked arms with the boys, and we headed to the elevator to meet Rick. Rick stood in the lobby, holding a small box. When he saw us, he smiled and walked over. For a moment, we looked like a regular family, husband, wife, and 2 sons. Rick complimented me, saying I looked beautiful, and I thanked him, blushing. He greeted Robert with a teasing remark, and shook Will's hand, sharing a meaningful glance with him. Then he handed Will the box. "This was given to me by my father when I went to college," Rick said. "Now it's time to pass it on to you." Will hesitated, then opened the box to reveal a gold pocket watch. Intricately engraved, he admired it, clearly moved by the gesture. Robert was excited too, showing no jealousy. I felt a surge of pride in my boys, and a tear welled up in my eye, which I quickly wiped away. "Shall we sit down?" I said, trying to keep things light. Rick, understanding, gently took my arm, and we were seated in the restaurant. Rick sat next to me, while Will and Robert sat across, both grinning. Dinner was fun. The boys devoured burgers and fries, while I had a salad and sandwich. Rick enjoyed a steak, and we all laughed and talked easily. For dessert, the boys had pie. Rick ordered sorbet, and I skipped. My dress was tight enough, as it was. After dinner, the boys left to meet their curfew, leaving me alone with Rick. For the first time in years, surprisingly, I wasn't scared. I had already lost him long ago. Rick ordered coffee, and I nodded in agreement, wanting the evening to continue. We sat in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company. I realized how much I had missed this connection. I wondered why we couldn't have parted as friends, but I knew the answer. The pain I had caused him was too deep to easily forgive. The waiter brought our coffee, pouring it for us before stepping away. Now we were truly alone. I wasn't sure what to say, and wondered if I should be the one to start. After all, wasn't this the conversation I had wanted for so long, but never had? Should I take the chance now, and say the things I'd kept bottled up, just as I worked up the nerve to speak? Rick turned to me. "Judith, can I ask you something?" Just a few things that have been on my mind for a while. That's okay. I was relieved that he started the conversation. Of course, Rick, anything. Just ask. He hesitated, then asked, "Is it true you talk to me? As if I'm there, as if I'm actually with you." That's what he wanted to ask. God, I'd prayed for this opportunity. Yes, it's true, I admitted. I've always done that. Ever since I started the business, I valued your advice so much that when you weren't around, I pretended you were. I knew you so well that I could imagine what you'd say. So I filled in for you. You have no idea how much you've helped me. Rick looked at me, surprised. Why didn't you just call me for advice? Wouldn't that have made more sense? Rick, you made it clear. You wanted nothing to do with me. We both know why, so why would I call you for advice? I asked, holding his gaze. He nodded in understanding and looked away. For a moment, I thought I'd been too blunt, but then he turned back to me. You never date, Rick said, suddenly. Why is that? I know things didn't work out after the divorce, but you're still beautiful and successful. I know plenty of men would love to go out with you. Why haven't you dated? It was the question I'd expected, and I was ready for it. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. What did I have to lose? I made a mistake 8 years ago, and I paid the price for it. I had no choice but to pay it, and I have. But after working with Cheryl Hopkins, my therapist, I realized there was only one man for me. And that man was you. I saw him about to object, so I quickly added, before you say anything, you need to understand, I made that promise on the flight home from San Diego. Wes and I had already ended our affair. I was ready to recommit to our marriage, and to you. I realize now how naive that was, to think I could just walk back into your life after what I'd done, but nothing I did then was reasonable or fair. I know that now. I screwed up. Rick, it was all my fault. I take full responsibility. I watched Rick process what I was saying. Taking another deep breath, I continued, after the divorce, I promised myself I'd be the perfect wife for you, even though I knew I couldn't be with you anymore. I've kept that promise, Rick. Even though we're divorced, I've stayed faithful. Dating someone else would feel like cheating on you, and I can't do that, or I won't do that. Rick looked confused. Unsure of what to say, I smiled gently, and after a few moments of silence, added, and I'll tell you something. The boys don't know. Sometimes I think of, well, let's just say inappropriate things I'd like to do with other men, but guess who I always end up with, in my dreams? Rick still looked puzzled, so I waited a few seconds before revealing the truth. You, Rick. Even in my dreams, I can't cheat on you. I may imagine other men at first, but you're always the one I end up with. Why? Watching his expression, I couldn't help but laugh. It was too funny. He had no idea how to respond, and for the first time in 8 years, I had the upper hand. God, how good it felt to say something serious, funny, and absurd to my ex-husband, without any fighting or drama. It was just fun, and I realized I was enjoying myself. You don't have to say anything, I said. I just wanted to tell you the truth. Whether you believe it or not, I know my credibility isn't exactly your top priority. Rick shook his head, still unsure how to take it, or what to say. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, but that's fine. One more question, if you don't mind. What are your plans for the future? If you don't date, and won't date anyone else, do you plan to stay single for the rest of your life? I can't believe that's what you want. Yes, there wasn't anything else to say. That was my choice, and I made it 6 years ago, after I emerged from that dark place. I explained it to Cheryl, and she accepted it as a reasonable decision. I had my reasons, and she knew them, so she never tried to change my mind. Rick looked at me, his eyes locked on mine. I met his gaze, my confidence in my own life and decisions, giving me the strength to stand firm. If I couldn't have Rick, because of what I did to him, then I'd paid the price. And I was free to make my own choices. I chose to be alone. Rick was still processing everything I had told him. I had been honest, given him the truth, and he knew it. There wasn't much for him to say, so he stayed quiet. I suggested we move to the lounge for a nightcap, and he gave me a look I didn't recognize. After 8 years, though, people change. Rick slid out of the booth, reached back to offer me his hand, and led me to the lounge. As I followed, I admired him from behind. He really was a striking man. He stopped to pay the bill while I waited in the lobby. Noticing a few glances from men nearby, I was used to that kind of attention, and ignored most of it, except for a few interesting looks, but I never gave the wrong impression. No flirtatious gestures, no lingering eyes, nothing to suggest I was available. Rick came over, took my arm gently, and guided me into the lounge. We sat at a small table in the back. And instead of sitting across from me, he chose to sit beside me. I was pleasantly surprised, and smiled widely. He smiled back. "Judith, I have to tell you something. Over the past 3 years, I've hired a private investigator to check up on you, just to prove to myself that Will and Robert weren't exaggerating about how you lived. I never wanted to invade your privacy, but I couldn't help but wonder about your personal life." My smile faded. After everything I'd done, I deserved to be punished, but what right did he have to keep tabs on me? After all this time, it wasn't fair, and I felt a surge of anger. For the first time in years, I knew I had to say something to Rick, even if it risked pushing him away. After 8 years and a divorce where you cut me out of your life, you decided to investigate me. I never did that to you. I told the boys not to discuss you, or bring your affairs or flings into my home. I respected your privacy. Why couldn't you do the same for me? "I'm sorry," he said. At first, I told myself it was to protect the boys, but I knew that wasn't true. "You were a great mother, and they've told me countless times how much they adored you, and how you gave them everything they needed to thrive." Then I told myself, I just wanted to see how you lived without a husband. That was closer to the truth. It shocked me to see how you lived, never dating, only going out with women, or clients. I couldn't understand why. And it drove me crazy. That's part of why I wanted to join you tonight, and for the game tomorrow. I needed to see for myself that you're happy and content with your life. And I'm convinced you are. You're happier and more at peace than I ever saw you before. It's a real improvement. I listened carefully to everything Rick said, and strangely enough, I believed him. The Rick I knew wouldn't invade my privacy without a reason. This was his way, and I understood him. He was still looking out for me, and for our sons, of course. Well, I guess you had your reasons. But I would have appreciated it more if you had just asked me. We talked from time to time. You could have asked. Would you have answered me honestly? Yes, Rick, I would have. This is who I am now. The person I became 5 years ago. I'm not the same woman who cheated on you, the one you shattered. I know who I am now, and I know what I did. I've paid the price. What's the saying? Do the crime, do the time. Well, I did the crime, and the time afterward was hell. For 3 years, I lived in darkness. First the divorce, then the fallout, the depression, the downfall, but I picked myself up and moved on. So yes, I would have told you everything. I would have welcomed the chance to explain why I did what I did. I prayed for the chance to say 2 things to you, Rick, just 2 simple things. You were never at fault for any of it, and I'm so sorry for what I did. Rick listened intently. And when I finished, his eyes widened. I could see a glassiness in them, as if he was fighting back tears. Rick was a proud, strong man, and I knew how hard it was for him to let me see him like this, so like any loving wife would do. I stood and excused myself to the ladies' room. I moved quickly to protect myself from breaking down in front of him. Once inside, I let myself go. I cried to release the tension, and when I finished, I was done. I had said what needed to be said. I was proud of myself, and I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Those simple words had been incredibly powerful. I rinsed my face with water, reapplied my lipstick, and put a few drops in my eyes to hide the redness. I looked at my reflection. Yes, I was ready to go back. When I returned to the table, Rick was sitting with his hands folded in front of him. He looked up as I approached, and greeted me with a huge smile. A look of pride, proud to be with me. "Be still, my heart, silly girl." He stood like the gentleman he always was, and waited until I sat down. Then he surprised me by saying, "Thank you for giving me time to compose myself. You always did know me better than I knew myself." "I did," I replied, "but that's because I loved you so much, it came naturally." "It still does, Rick. I still love you." I nearly tensed, preparing for his reaction. I was ready for anything: anger, pain, disgust, surprise, even embarrassment. Any of those would make sense from someone I'd hurt as deeply as I hurt Rick. I was prepared for the worst. What he said next completely surprised me. "I believe you, Judith. I really do believe you love me now. And that you loved me then. I never doubted that. My actions weren't because I thought you loved Wes more than me. I divorced you because your betrayal hurt so badly that I couldn't find a way forward with you, and I tried. I really tried. When I found out what you were doing, I asked myself if I could forgive and forget, I was almost ready to accept it, as a mistake we could move past. Then you lied about the San Diego trip, and who you were going with. That's when I knew my love wasn't enough. I had no choice. As I listened, my heart broke, not for me, but for him. His voice softened as he continued, "You might not believe me, but walking away was the hardest decision I ever made, because like you, I never stopped loving you, even knowing what you did. I couldn't stop loving you, I just couldn't forgive you, and I knew I'd never forget. Rick, please, let's not go there. I understand, and I don't blame you for not forgiving me. I know what I did. And I carry that shame. You've been fair with me, always cooperative when it came to our sons. You've never thrown my mistakes in my face. All I can say is thank you for giving me this time to say what I needed to. It's a gift I'll always cherish. Thank you." Rick looked at me with that unfamiliar expression again. I didn't fully understand it, but it wasn't anger or resentment. So I was grateful. I felt good, like maybe we could become friends again. I wanted to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Tell me about Jean Chambers. Last I heard, she was heading towards Sirius. Is she about to become the next Mrs. Proctor?" My stomach flipped at the mention of her, but I thought if I brought it up, he'd feel comfortable mentioning his future plans. His expression shifted to surprise. Maybe he hadn't planned to talk about her. Maybe it was still too soon. He shook his head and said, "I haven't seen Jean in almost 2 years. Surprised you even remembered her. Really, you mentioned once that you thought you might actually love her. I assumed marriage was in the cards. I was smitten at the time. She was young, ambitious, and I thought I could keep up. Boy, was I wrong. We broke up not long after I said that. I'm not seeing anyone now. Haven't been with anyone since her. But why?" I couldn't help asking. "You're still as attractive as ever, and you have everything a woman would want. You're successful, good-looking, great in bed, and well off. What's stopping you?" "I just haven't found anyone who satisfies me completely. The women I've dated were either too pushy, not assertive enough, bad in bed, or just looking for someone to take care of them. None of them had what I needed." He paused, then looked at me seriously. "There was one who had it all, but it didn't work out." I took the bait, eager to hear more. This was my Rick. Even if what he said hurt me, it was wonderful to just sit here and talk with him. Why didn't it work out? Was she foolish enough to let you slip away? Who was this crazy woman? It was you, and yes, she was foolish. She pushed me away. It's too bad, because she was perfect for me. My breath came in shallow gasps. This was it, my chance for something I had given up hope on ever having again. If I didn't take the risk now, I would regret it forever. I might crash and burn, but I'd go down fighting. Heart in hand, I went for it. Maybe she learned her lesson. Rick, maybe she's smarter now, and knows what she'd have with a man like you. Maybe she's ready for you now. Ready for a life together, with all that comes with it. I'm sure she wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Do you think that's possible? Could she be different this time? Why wouldn't she make the same mistakes again?" He asked, quietly. "I don't think I could take that kind of pain again. It hurt too much the first time. I think she'd rather die than make those mistakes again. She knows how much pain it caused those she loved. I think she'd die before doing that again. In fact, I know she would. I know it with all my heart." Rick looked at me, and I held my breath. Could he forgive me? Had time softened his heart enough to dull the pain I caused him, allowing him to love me again? I looked into his eyes, holding his gaze, hoping the person I had become would be clear. If he looked closely enough, he said nothing, but reached for my hand. I gave it to him, still holding my breath. If he didn't speak soon, I felt like I would burst. This night had taken a turn I never expected. He had gone all the way back, offering a chance I thought was lost forever, and I wasn't sure I could hold on much longer without screaming. "I believe you, because I want to believe you, Judith. I have to believe you, if I want to be happy. I haven't been happy. In the last 8 years, I've tried to forget you and move on, but that's been a failure. None of those women were you. That's who I was searching for. I finally realized that there's only ever been one woman for me." My heart soared at his words. But then he paused, and his tone shifted. "But Judith, the only thing I can say today is that I forgive you. I forgive you for destroying my family and my marriage. I've tried to move on for years, but I couldn't. Something was always holding me back. Now I realize it was my anger. I'm letting it go. I don't have any emotions left. That time to you, you said I devastated you for 8 years. No, I didn't. It was the consequences of your actions. I just reacted to what you did. Now I feel nothing for you. No anger, no hate, and finally, no love. Then he stood up and walked away. Will's team lost in the quarterfinals, but we all cheered him on. He played brilliantly, and it was enough to earn him the scholarship he had worked so hard for. His father and I were so proud of him. That night, he played his heart out, but accepted the loss with grace. He went on to play in college, earned a degree in business management, and joined his father's company. After graduation, he worked his way up until Rick retired and passed the business to him. Along the way, Will married Jill, his high school sweetheart, and they now have 3 wonderful children. Robert earned an academic scholarship and attended Harvard. He wanted to be a lawyer. Graduated with honors and joined a law firm in New York City. He built a reputation as a fierce attorney and eventually started his own practice. He now has a team of 4 lawyers. And recently proposed to a woman he met through one of his cases. They seem deeply in love, and we are hopeful for their future. Rick and I met several times over the years. He was always polite, too polite, and I could tell it was just out of courtesy. I still loved him, but he had nothing left for me. I couldn't blame him. I had made him the man he became. I kept my company, and we stayed successful in the industry. Over time, I let my partners take on more responsibility and worked less and less. When Rick handed his company over to Will, I made the tough decision to sell mine to a group of my employees. We reached an agreement, and I finally retired. I turned 60, and everyone came to celebrate. But as I mingled, smiling and chatting with everyone, I kept looking for Rick. I laughed and made small talk, but inside I felt empty. I had a house, a car, and my sons, but no one to share my life with. Rick passed away a year later. He never remarried, all because of me. He died peacefully in his sleep. I saw him in the casket, white-haired, clean-shaven, and still handsome, although he left me emotionally long ago. This time he was gone for good. I still visit his grave. I sit there, but I have no words for him. All I'm left with are regrets, wishing I had made different choices, but all I can do now is regret.